In the late 19th century, a period characterized as part of the Victorian era, social mores dictated the manners of conduct between young men and young women to be that of a chaste existence. However, with the dawn of the 20th century just a few years away, the repressed desires of the age came to fruition, not with an advocate for sexual freedom, but the publicity surrounding one horrendous crime. Blanche Lamont, a young, vivacious 20-year-old woman, taught school in a one-room facility in Hecla, Montana. Lamont thought her opportunities would be better if she advanced her education. Therefore, she moved to San Francisco, California, to attend the normal school and Lowell High while living with her aunt, Miss Tryphenia Noble, on 21st Street in the Mission District. On April 3, 1895, at approximately 10 a.m., Blanche rode the Polk Street trolley, and she met a young man who rode with her on the cable car until they reached 21st Street. Other witnesses who observed Blanche and the young man noticed that they were very close as they conversed. The young man took to whispering in the young woman's ear and tapping her on her gloved hands. When they got off their stop at 21st Street, they went their separate ways. Blanche to the normal school, and the young man to an undisclosed location. The young man later visited the Noble's house and brought a book with him, but then informed Noble that Blanche may have been kidnapped and sold into prostitution. Noble thought this rather odd. A few days later, the young man, later identified as William Henry Theodore Durrant, traveled to the Tenderloin district and tried to pawn some golden rings that allegedly belonged to Blanche. Police subsequently questioned Durrant due to the fact that he may have been the last person to see Blanche. Durrant stated that gangs operated in the area and perhaps they, quote, shanghaied, end quote, Blanche for sale into white slavery. When police shallowly examined Durrant's background, they noticed some immoral suggestions made by a female churchgoer who witnessed Durrant nude in the church library. But police dismissed these accusations as merely gossip. However, it did make for an interesting investigation at the time. Considering the time period in which this occurred, appearing nude in a church was scandalous, but the police realized that they possessed no evidence, no body, or any other indications that Blanche was nothing but missing, and would remain that way, even if it was just for a short while. What authorities later learned about Durrant exposed a wolf in sheep's clothing. Durrant was not a stranger to those who attended the Emmanuel Baptist Church, as he and his family were members there. At the time of Blanche's disappearance, he courted a young 21-year-old named Minnie Flora Williams, also a member of the Emmanuel Baptist Church. On Good Friday, April 12, 1895, 9 days after Blanche disappeared, Minnie Williams told some friends at her boarding house that she needed to attend a church meeting at the house of one of the elders named Vogel. Vogel's wife witnessed Durrant walking with Blanche Lamont on the day she disappeared. At approximately 7 p.m. that evening, witnesses noticed Minnie Williams and Durrant arguing violently in front of the church. A passerby named Hodgkins stopped to intervene in the fray and later stated that the manner in which Durrant acted in front of him and Minnie was not the behavior of a gentleman. Minnie and Durrant entered the church. At approximately 9 p.m. that evening, Durrant walked into the church elders' Easter Sunday. One of the ladies went to the cabinet inside the vestibule and stumbled upon a ghastly scene. Inside the cabinet where drinking cups had been stored, the lady found the mutilated body of whom police later identified as Minnie Williams. After calling another member of the Women's Committee to witness what she found, the police were called and immediately they searched for Blanche Lamont. After an in-depth search of the areas of the Emmanuel Baptist Church that lasted most of that Saturday, someone remembered that they had not searched the belfry of the church. As soon as police reached the belfry, they found the lifeless body of Blanche Lamont, her body nude, mutilated, with her head between two boards. Immediately after listening to witnesses who last saw the young ladies with a particular young man, the police searched in earnest to find Theodore Durrant. A more intense examining of the background of William Henry Theodore Durrant deemed him something of a good catch to ladies of the period. Durrant was born in 1871 in Toronto, Canada, to William Durrant, who made his living as a shoemaker, and his wife Isabella Hutchinson Durrant. In 1879, William Durrant decided to move the family to the United States, San Francisco, California specifically. Durrant had a younger sibling named Beulah Maud Durrant, who was born in 1873 and later changed her name to Maud Allen, becoming a moderately successful actress in her time. Durrant's early life is somewhat of an historical mystery, but when he reached the age where he could continue his education, Durrant attended the Cooper Medical College, as was considered by those that knew him at the time as, quote, a mild-mannered, pleasant youth who was the soul of propriety, a much-respected church worker, and a bright medical student, end quote. Durrant told people that he saw himself as a successful doctor in the future. He was also considered to be a good young man among the members of the Emmanuel Baptist Church. At the church, Durrant worked as an usher, was the assistant Sunday school teacher, and worked as a handyman around the church when small repairs needed attention. When he heard that the police may have been looking for him to question the young man about the two women, he immediately left the vicinity and joined the Signal Corps, where the police eventually located him, but apprehended him the next day and brought him to the police station for questioning. Upon arriving at the station, Durrant at first denied any wrongdoing, but authorities felt they had their man and charged Durrant with the premeditated first-degree murder of both Blanche Lamont and Minnie Williams. Prior to Durrant's indictment, news of the murder spread quickly and nationally. When the victims had been embalmed and placed into their coffins, crowds gathered for blocks to parade past the funeral home where Blanche Lamont and Minnie Williams would later be waked. The media saw the opportunity to sell newspapers, and questions arose later as to whether Durrant could get an unbiased jury or a fair trial. But eventually, any concerns dissipated as people from around California, and the nation for that matter, searched for the truth of what occurred to these two beautiful, promising women. One observer surmised that the reason why this case became so famous, or infamous, is the portrayal of Durrant by the people that knew him, the young, promising medical student who was a devout churchgoer and did anything to help his fellow man, versus the result of a sexual, homicidal maniac as portrayed by the media and the police. Soon, everyone would know the truth and understood that appearances can be deceiving and deadly. Police theorized as to what happened on that April morning in 1895 when Durrant met Blanche Lamont on the trolley car as the two headed to their respective schools. The two were quickly noticed by the other riders on the vehicle as Durrant whispered into Blanche's ear and tapped her gloved hands. She never really acknowledged Durrant's presence except to gently tilt her head with his whispers. Blanche stared ahead most of the time. Durrant made plans with the young lady to meet her later at the Emmanuel Baptist Church, but neither of them had religion on their mind. At the time, young people made it fashionable for them to meet in churches, who left their doors open to meet for, quote, clandestine sexual rendezvous in empty church rooms, end quote. At approximately 2 p.m. on the afternoon of April 3, 1895, Durrant and Blanche met once again, and one witness noticed that Durrant appeared to be in a hurry to meet Blanche at the church. Mrs. Carolyn Leake witnessed Durrant open the heavy oak door to the church so that Blanche could walk through the jam. 3 hours later, choir director George King made his way to the organ for practice and was startled somewhat when he saw a disheveled Durrant approach him. Durrant stated he had been fixing some gas jets upstairs in the Belfry. King noted that Durrant requested the choir director go to the local drugstore and get him some bromo seltzer. King complied, and when he returned to the church, Durrant appeared as though some color returned to his face. Then he strolled out of the church into the cool evening air. Investigators further concluded that once Durrant and Blanche made their way into the church, the Belfry seemed like the perfect place for a rendezvous. The two then went to the Belfry, had sexual relations, and then laid on the Belfry floor. Authorities also speculated that, from the way the body was discovered, it appeared that the top bodice of her dress had been ripped open by the killer in order to ensure that the knife he used penetrated her flesh. Investigators also suspected that when Blanche Lamont's body was discovered in the Belfry, Durrant placed her head between two blocks of wood, a technique that Durrant would have learned in medical school, then folded her arms over her chest as if he prepared the body for burial. It appeared that Durrant may have had sex with Blanche Lamont again after her death. Durrant, after completing his grisly work, left the Belfry through a seldom used trap door. Durrant returned to the church that evening for services and saw Mrs. Tryphenia Noble, Blanche's aunt, and asked her where she may have been. Mrs. Noble stated that she had hoped that Blanche would have made it to the services that evening. Durrant mentioned that he brought a book for the young woman to read, but would later drop it off at Mrs. Noble's house. Mrs. Noble ended the conversation by stating that Blanche did not return home from school that day. Her worry intensified over the next few days. Mrs. Noble waited a whole 3 days before she addressed her concerns with the local police department. Durrant immediately fell under the suspicion of authorities, as he may have been the last person to see Blanche alive. Police later learned that Durrant often bragged about his sexual prowess in the brothels of Carson City, Nevada. In fact, he once bragged to some classmates that he raped an Indian woman. Authorities already dismissed the notion that Blanche Lamont had been kidnapped and sold into white slavery. Police also learned that Durrant tried to convince Mrs. Noble of this fallacy, but knowing the young girl's reputation, even though she may have met Durrant for a sexual rendezvous, Noble hardly thought the suggestion plausible. Additionally, the attempt to sell the gold rings at a pawn shop stuck out as very strange to investigators. In their minds, Durrant tried to eliminate evidence of his complicity in the murder of Blanche Lamont. Before the discovery of Blanche Lamont's body, Durrant already set his sights on another beautiful young woman, Miss Minnie Williams, 21 years old. On Good Friday, April 12, 1895, at approximately 7 p.m. that evening, Minnie bade her fellow boarders goodbye and left for a meeting with a church elder. A few minutes later, a witness observed Minnie giving a sharp rebuke to Durrant in front of the Emmanuel Baptist Church. Later that evening, Durrant appeared at the home of Miss Mary Vogel, whose husband was in charge of the church fellowship meeting, and one of the witnesses that saw Durrant with Blanche Lamont in front of the church. Vogel noticed that Durrant appeared shaken and stated that before joining the meeting, he had to wash his hands. By the time the meeting adjourned, Durrant exhibited no visible signs of distress as when he first entered the meeting. Before leaving the meeting, however, at approximately midnight, Durrant stated loud enough for everyone to hear that he had to return to the church at that late hour because he left something. On the morning of Saturday, April 13, 1895, since Durrant became a member of the Signal Corps, he left for a bivouac on Mount Diablo. On that following Easter Sunday, Minnie Williams's body was discovered when the Ladies' Society prepared for the Sunday services. When police arrived and viewed the body, they witnessed that her wrists had been slashed, her breasts stabbed repeatedly, and her undergarments forced down her throat. Blood dripped to the bottom of the cupboard and leaked onto the library floor. Upon examination by an alienist, notes reflected that the cuts on Minnie's arms were so deep that not only had the monster cut her arteries, but the tendons had been severed as well. The stab wounds to her breasts were made with a dull table knife. After the discovery of Minnie's corpse, newspapers goaded the authorities to search the church further for any other clues as to where Blanche Lamont may be, seeing as Durrant had a connection with both women. When searching the church again, as they made their way to the Belfry, the police noted the smell of decay and flies overpopulating the area. Blanche's body appeared bloated and her face was fearfully distorted, the mouth being open, exposing the pearly teeth and attesting to the terrible death the girl had died. At the end of that day, a San Francisco detective apprehended Durrant at Mount Diablo and placed him under arrest. The case of the state of California versus William Henry Theodore Durrant began during the first 2 weeks of October and went into the early part of November 1895. Even though Durrant stood to be executed if convicted of the 2 murders, he still drew the admiration from young women all over the West. A young blonde-haired woman even brought Durrant a bouquet of flowers every morning. Durrant continued to protest his innocence and sat in the courtroom every day listening to the mostly circumstantial evidence against him. But as he sat motionless and cool within the confines of the courthouse, Durrant's actions on the days of the murders became quite clear with the testimony presented in the state's case. Defense attorneys stated that Durrant did not have any blood on his clothing, but common sense dictated that he must have disposed of the clothing prior to leaving for bivouac. Moreover, defense attorneys sought to shift suspicion away from their client and named Reverend John George Gibson, who spent hours in the church by himself, as the murderer. The prosecution averred that Durrant sustained no blood spatter because at the time of the murders and after sexual intercourse, he was naked, and all he had to do was wash to eliminate any bloodstains. After an examination by psychologists, they labeled Durrant as, quote, a moral idiot, end quote, but never characterized the accused murderer as being insane. Rather, they portrayed the defendant as being morally defective. It turned out that the jury needed no psychological analysis to determine whether Durrant capable of such crimes as the murders of Blanche Lamont and Minnie Williams. Throughout the defense's case, they merely stated that Durrant was not responsible for the murder of the 2 young women and presented no evidence that the defendant may have suffered from a temporary psychosis that forced him to murder them. The prosecution presented more witnesses that Minnie Williams stated she knew more about Blanche's disappearance than she let on. Was Minnie murdered due to her alleged knowledge about Blanche's disappearance? After a lengthy trial that lasted until November of 1895, the jury received their instructions and deliberated for a whole 5 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty against the defendant, William Henry Theodore Durrant, and the judge pronounced the death sentence as punishment. Even throughout the appeals process, Durrant's attorneys gave excuses for Durrant's behavior, from the jaunts on the Barbary Coast, the sordid sexual advances, and drunken debauchery that Durrant concealed from the church members. On the morning of January 7, 1898, the day of Durrant's execution, he refused to confess to a priest because he professed his innocence again, even at the day of his death. In fact, the condemned man blamed the newspapers for his conviction. Led to the gallows at San Quentin Penitentiary, his arms strapped to his side, once the executioner placed a white hood over his head and situated Durrant over the trapdoor, he began a long soliloquy from under the hood, his words slightly muffled, regarding why he should not have been convicted and that he was innocent. He paused for a brief moment when the executioner placed the noose around his neck and tightened the knot. With the order for his execution read one last time, Durrant was in mid-sentence when the executioner pulled the lever, releasing the trapdoor. Observers noted that they heard Durrant's neck snap and his lifeless body hung there for several minutes. His blue eyes, which some people claimed were pale to the point of glassiness, bulged from his face, and his blackened tongue protruded from between his lips. Strangely, when Durrant's body was placed in a black lacquer coffin after the execution, his parents sat in an anteroom off the location where the execution took place, eating lunch as the dead body of their son lay in his coffin. When prison officials withdrew from the room to give some time alone with their son, one of the officials overheard Mrs. Durrant say,
"Please, Papa, give me a little more roast."
As a result of Durrant's reputation and the fact that the population of California, and the rest of the country for that matter, reviled the murderer, no cemetery would accept his remains. Durrant's parents then took the body, had it cremated, and spread the ashes at an undisclosed location in Los Angeles, California. Undoubtedly, had Theo Durrant not been caught after the murder of Minnie Williams, he displayed the characteristics of a lustful killer and would have continued his reign of terror. In comparison to modern serial killers such as Bundy, Durrant proved handsome, charming, and deadly all at the same time without arousing suspicion based upon his alleged gentlemanly manner. But Durrant made one mistake that Bundy did not. Durrant would not move outside of his social circles to find victims. One has to wonder if Durrant committed his crimes in a more permissive era when it came to sexual mores. Could he have claimed more victims? Fortunately, there is no need for hypothesizing. Until next time.